I wanted to start the Parrot Room by asking you a question about why you left Platypus, and with it, what made you decide to no longer identify with the left, and are you now, as an acquisitions editor for Sublation, back on the left again?
Oh, okay. So I'll separate this into two parts.
The death of God is about the drying up of a horizon of meaning and of a whole form of human life.
All right. Well, welcome, Sublation Media viewers. This is the Diet Soap Podcast. With me today is Comrade Wyatt, native-born Chicagoan, the star of the upcoming documentary film The Last Election, and ex-Platypus member. Wyatt here is convinced that he is aligned with the far right, but I know that in his heart of hearts, he's just another leftist. Wyatt, welcome to the Diet Soap Podcast.
Thank you, Doug. Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to see you.
Yeah, well, it's a pleasure to see you, and I enjoy
my fellow editor.
Right. I should also point out Wyatt is an acquisitions editor for Sublation Magazine. I bestowed that honor upon him at a bar in Chicago, not knowing that it would be a controversial decision amongst the rest of the editorial team. But I stuck to my guns, and Wyatt is an acquisitions editor for Sublation.
The great Con. He makes the decisions.
Or as George W. Bush said, I am the decider, you know?
Yeah.
So listen, you are going to be the first author of the new, newly revamped, newly launched Sublation Magazine. Your essay is called The Right to a Critique, and it could be read as a defense of Donald Trump, but in a way, it's actually a deeper attack on Donald Trump than anything that we're seeing from the Democratic Party, certainly, since Trump was inaugurated. So let's start with that. What is a right to a critique, and why does Trump have it?
A right to a critique is, instead of saying, in a certain sense, right? Marx says, to critique everything in the world, right? And to some extent that's true. But also there are, world historical figures who are probably more worthy of a critique than the toothbrush, right? So Trump is, in many respects, right, he represents the movement of history into a new sort of stage, or at least the movement of capital into a new sort of stage. And in effect, by creating a new status quo, which is what he's done, because his first election was sort of a false start. And I try to get through that in my essay. His first election was sort of a false start. Biden's election, it was also similarly a sort of false start. It was sort of some neoliberal reforms, some sort of clinging on to neoliberalism, but also some opening up of what I guess we're now calling post-neoliberalism. I think eventually we need to find a better word for it, because everyone else got better words. Like, no one called neoliberalism post-Fordism after a few years. But regardless, he's created a new status quo. And that status quo is deficient in the same way that any capitalist status quo is deficient, because on the grounds of liberalism, it's going to be deficient, because true liberalism, as we had from, in the 19th century, has basically become impossible within an advanced industrial society. You have to have some sort of basically authoritarian state to manage society. And it's also insufficient on the grounds of socialism, because capitalism, capitalism is something that points beyond itself, and a new order of capitalism and a new status quo in capitalism is not gonna, is not taking up all of the potential that exists as it is now. So that is a right to a critique. He's now earned by creating this new status quo, and it is in culture, it is in the economy, it's in politics, it's in the judiciary, all these things that he's created a new status quo in. They all fall short of the expectations set by the Enlightenment, and they all fall short from the standpoint of what is possible.
Well, I mean, I can't help but think about my co-host for the Sublation Magazine show, which it's on every Monday and features Benjamin Studebaker as my co-host, and he is very skeptical of this idea that we're going to be in an era that could be defined as post-neoliberal. He goes so far as he questions the validity of the concept of neoliberalism itself, but it is the case that there are many things that Trump is doing that appear to be in accord with like the Paul Ryans of the world or the Mitt Romneys of the world. And there's a division within the Trump administration between like the Vivek Ramaswamy, Elon Musk side of the ideology and the Bannon side, say, or Trump himself. So how do you become so confident that, in fact, this is marking a major change in the status quo and is not just a deepening of neoliberalism?
So I'm sympathetic to actually Studebaker's suggestion that neoliberalism never happened. In fact, I wrote an article in Sublation a few years ago where that's actually precisely what I said, that neoliberalism never happened. I would argue there that the true neoliberals, so Milton Friedman, Hayek, etc., like their actual plans were never actually implemented. You got some tightening of a few things, some loosening of a few things, but actually the state continued to grow. And every chart we have of state, like the size of the state, the spending of the state continues to grow. The number of laws that are created, so every year, more and more laws are created than are taken off the books. So the state continues to grow, and I see no reason the state's going to continue to grow under Trump, both administratively and otherwise. And likewise, there will be some tightening and loosening, and there will be some cuts and some expansions. So I'm sympathetic to this idea. Nevertheless, we have to acknowledge that Trump has created a new status quo in the whole of capitalism. So looking at it just from a policy angle, you might say, oh, well, he's just deepened this or that neoliberal policy. But on the other hand, he's also veered wildly off course of the old sort of Washington consensus. On the other hand, within culture, so within society itself, culture has changed. I mean, I noticed a few weeks ago, Saturday Night Live had a sketch where they were like making fun of gay men for shopping for babies. And that was like an alt-right meme in like 2012. Like that was like something you had to go on like 4chan to like discover and like, whatever, get in arguments about. And now it's like Saturday Night Live is hosting it.
What's the guy's name who made the movie Borat?
Yeah. That Sacha Baron Cohen.
Right. And he did another movie that I forget the title of where he played gay. Bruno.
Yeah.
And Bruno shops for a child in that movie.
Yeah, something like that. But that also was the height of neoconservatism in the United States. Whereas, I would say if we're going to define neoliberalism more holistically, less as like an economic system, because clearly the economics were never implemented. If we define it holistically as a movement within politics, society, etc., Obama era is really like the height of that. And then sort of the first Trump admin is sort of the freak out before the destruction of it. It's sort of the storm of that. But, we're looking at culture just wildly change. I mean, I also noticed, I've noticed that if you look at the top 40s, country is back in a big way, like country music. You all of a sudden, like, people aren't, young people especially are sort of very dissatisfied with feminism and LGBT. I think LGBT rights have taken the hardest hit, not among the elderly, but among young people. So like the idea, and I think that's partially the fault of, a wide variety of things. But nevertheless, like Trump is the figurehead of a new status quo in culture, politics, law. You can go down the list. And whether we want to call that post-neoliberalism or not, it is a new status quo. And so we can call it whatever we'd like. We can call it, goo goo gaga. I don't really care. We can make up a dumb name for it. Studebaker is both correct and incorrect insofar as he is pointing out a legitimate phenomena, right? So like, for instance, and this actually happened in the 80s. What's the name of the guy who founded DSA?
Now you're putting me on the spot. I should know that.
Michael Harrington.
Harrington. Yeah.
Michael Harrington went on to Milton Friedman had a show on, and it was like Anthony.
Yeah, public access or something.
Yeah,
right?
it was like Anthony Bourdain does free markets or something. And then he would get together with a bunch of sort of public intellectuals or young intellectuals. And he would discuss with them, and he got in a debate with Michael Harrington, and Harrington said to him, and this was in many ways Harrington's only serious engagement with like actual Marxism. Harrington said to him, like, you're right. Like, if we had like a deregulated market, with some backstops and whatever else, but a mostly deregulated market, it would be pro-worker. And prices would vastly lower for everything. You would decartelize the entire market. And this goes back to like Kolko and the Wisconsin school. But you're not going to. So instead, what this is going to be is sort of a handout for the ultra wealthy. And he was pretty prescient on that. And that's fair enough.
What was Friedman's response to that?
Friedman was a little confused. I think they went back and debated on and off about it for a little bit on the show, and I think Friedman was a little more confident that he could get the sort of economic changes he wanted, but it didn't quite work out, obviously, because we didn't really deregulate the economy. It was not easier to start a business in 1990 than it was in 1970. It was easier if you had a business, perhaps, in certain areas of the economy, but it was not a deregulation. So
I'm going to try to find that exchange with Harrington and Friedman and maybe put it into the show if I can.
Yeah.
But I may not have time to, but people should look it up. If nothing else, I'll put it in the description for the show. But I think that, you said two things here which are very different, and which I think one which is much stronger than the other. Your point about how even someone like Michael Harrington would be for the kind of neoliberalism that Milton Friedman was advocating for, if it could be realized, is that's a very interesting and it's also, I think, a true point. Although the truth of it is difficult to fully grasp, I think, especially for people on the left. But the first point about the new status quo in the culture, I raised Bruno as a counterexample. Now, there are lots of differences between that sketch on Saturday Night Live and Bruno. Bruno is a completely freaky character.
Yeah.
And these characters on the Saturday Night Live sketch are sort of upper middle class gays and that are supposed to be taken to be more like an everyman type gay couple, right?
Yeah, so bourgeois gay domesticity. Yeah,
right. Yeah. Where Bruno is some sort of jet-setting pop star freak. So whatever he does isn't
Euro trash.
Euro trash. So he's not meant to be. He's not. It was not an indictment of the conservative gay culture.
Yeah.
Right. So there's a difference, but nonetheless, Sydney Sweeney's breasts or the sketch on Saturday Night Live.
No, boobs coming back are like that's a big part of post-neoliberalism, in my opinion. You can
I know, but I just think it's sort of a weak argument because I don't remember boobs ever really going away.
Oh, boobs totally went away. It was all about the ass in neoliberalism. There's probably a psychoanalytic reason for that, but
you got to remember, like, neoliberalism included the Reagan era. All right.
Yeah, but Reagan era was all about the. I think Reagan era was about anorexia, and then we really got the ass in the Obama era. But it was really Clinton to Obama. I mean, you had the J-Lo moment. If you go watch Generation Kill, they're all afraid J-Lo has died because her ass won't be there anymore. I think the ass moment lasted a lot longer.
I just remember the Swedish bikini team for Budweiser beer. Okay. And these were ladies who had some boobs on them,
bosoms. Yeah.
Yeah. So I just think that, there was kind of a general trend towards the ass in the last decade and a half or so.
Maybe 2 decades. I think the 90s we already had an ass moment. But
okay. But the point is, like, you're always going to be able to come up with a counterexample when it comes to representations of female beauty. All aspects of it stay relatively in style.
This is also like, I mean, capitalism is contradictory, and you're always going to have some level of sort of give and take with things. And it's not to say like at this moment country music was uninaugurated and we moved into hip hop, or
yeah, right.
In this moment rock music died and we moved into pop music. It's not as simple as saying that.
Right.
Instead, it's a question of, when we talk about culture, that's one thing. But it is very clear to me that there has just been a seismic shift in the way culture is being done. And culture is only one piece of it. I mean, we have to also look at the economy. The way the economy is working. We have to look at the way that politics is now changed. We have to look at the issues we're talking about today are very different than the issues we talked about through the liberal era and the way we talked about them. So, it's sort of a complicated phenomena in many respects. And we can't just say like, I mean, there's a few contradictory things, but we're not in a new status quo. I think we are in a new status quo, politically, economically, and culturally, and we have to, and now on the basis of really the two traditions that we inherit, we have to come to terms with the fact that there's no critique being offered. There's just complaint.
Yeah. So like last night I went to a platypus coffee break in Portland, right? And we discussed Laclau and the post-Marxists and and we'd read an essay by Laclau about defending himself from a Trotskyist critic in the New Left Review of the post-Marxism. And Laclau was arguing, I think he had a partner who was working on the essay with him, that rather than turning to a Marxist critique of the totality, that instead there needed to be a linguistic cultural approach to criticism and activism that could take up all the different complaints of society, from gays and ethnic minorities and women and different nationalities and immigrants and so on, right?
That happened. We did that. We lived through that from the 90s through the 2010s.
Right. I mean, but this was written a while ago. I don't know exactly when, right? But this was an older essay, and it was advocating for that turn as it was already happening, right? And maybe even well after it really had already happened. But it was not aimed at activists. It was aimed at intellectuals. It was aimed at maintaining that course, I think, and fending off Marxist critics of that approach to left politics. And one of the things I think is developed through that is even those who would call themselves Marxists tend to think in terms of complaints, tend to think in cultural, linguistic, or terms, or in policy terms, rather than being able to think through the totality and through generalizations. And I'm sympathetic to wanting to avoid generalizations. And we just sort of talked about why that's dangerous just when it comes to like, were Sydney Sweeney's boobs really marking a transition in our culture or not? I mean, how seriously should we take that? But on the other hand, we do need to be able to note massive changes in the totality and be able to critique them. But I feel like we've almost lost the ability to critique through like the 90s, maybe, or maybe earlier than that the post-structural turn gutted critique in a way. Is that too intellectual an approach to this?
Well, in some respects. So like, okay, so let's take Foucault as an example. All right, so Foucault is very good at understanding prisons and the way prisons have sort of become a sort of standardized way of dealing with society. On the other hand, he sort of lacks the vision to say, instead it's just, well, okay, I guess we should get rid of this. Or this is a certain kind of oppression that then the rest of society mimics. Or at least the state mimics in its way of relating to society. But instead, the older socialist line that is critique is saying, well, why do we live in a world where we have to have prisons? Why is this a necessity? Why is mass society mimicking the prison a necessity of society or the state in society today? Right? So that would be critique, whereas Foucault he's getting something that could be a critique, but he's not get there. He's and so in a way, the post-structuralist turn, in my opinion, and I can't do Derrida or whatever, so we're not going to do that. But I can do a little Foucault. I do have a philosophy degree. You know, and basically, you know, we're getting there with some of this stuff, but we're not. It's sort of an avoidance of the question of, well, we have all this potential. Why is it being used towards, you know, barbaric technology, right? Why is all of a sudden technology that could be used for the betterment of humanity, et cetera, being used for barbaric ends? And that, you know, that's a critique, right? Because that actually gets into, well, we can actually change the world. We can go beyond this. And in fact, we have to go beyond this. Because we can't go back. Can't just abolish this, abolish that, harm reduce this, harm reduce that. Instead, we actually have to like see what exists, and then see how that could be put towards an emancipated society, a society beyond capitalism.
Right, but it does become difficult if you're trying to actually, let's say, protect the remnants of liberalism, to critique on the level that you're suggesting without just ending with some platitude like, oh, well, the problem is capitalism. Oh, well, we have to look to the root of society.
The problem is not capitalism. The problem is that we're not more revolutionary than capitalism itself, right? Like that's the problem. And that's where like critique comes in, right? It's like Kant critiquing civilization, you know, the good, the true, and the beautiful, which are sort of the linchpins of civilization from the standpoint of society, is him actually being more revolutionary than both civilization and the emerging society, emerging bourgeois society itself, right? So that,
yeah, but let me give you an example of what I mean when I say to point to that doesn't seem adequate, you know. So when I discovered that the Biden administration had set up what Michael Schellenberger is calling the censorship industrial complex, or the woke censorship industrial complex, and that it was being run out of the Department of Homeland Security and various other intelligence agencies, and that that if my video was being suppressed or taken down on YouTube, it was because the state didn't like it. Ultimately, I reacted with you know, I with the conviction that I would simply have to oppose these newly emerging institutions and newly emerging agencies within old institutions in an attempt to defeat them, get rid of them, to roll them back. I wanted to see the end of CISA. I wanted to see the end of the Disinformation Governance Board, which did end. I wanted to see.
Well, it did, and it didn't end.
Yeah,
right. It changed, right? So it's like these things don't end, right? So like we had a censorship industrial complex, and it was like woke. Now we have one where the state is censoring people who are woke, right? Or at least some.
Well, it remains a little unclear to the degree to which that same censorship apparatus is operative today. It does seem that there is another mechanism being deployed through immigration, policing, through ICE, and other attempts to impose deportations. That is being used as a much more kind of direct and barbaric approach than the
They're,
subtle.
they're being deployed in like a very specific way, though, because it's not just that they're being deployed. It's not just that we're saying, okay, there's too many migrants in the country. We need these people to go rebuild their own countries. Let's deport them.
Mhm.
It's being used very specifically against right now Palestine protesters.
Mhm.
Many of whom were green card holders, and many of whom didn't even protest. Right? I think there was that Turkish student who just wrote an op-ed.
Right.
Right. So like, but this is how the capitalist state doesn't like change so much as or go away so much as it sort of morphs into new things that it wants its hand in. So, you look at, the Cold War is a great example of this, right? Like the state builds all these institutions within itself to fight the Cold War.
Mhm.
And in fact, in the 90s, after the Berlin Wall falls, you have neoconservatives. These are not people who are like dovish on foreign policy, but neoconservatives like Jeane Kirkpatrick and even Irving Kristol saying, okay, the Berlin Wall has fallen. There's no more need for NATO. And I think Jeane Kirkpatrick even has an essay, I don't know if it's titled A Normal Country in a Normal Time, or if that's just sort of like the most famous sentence in it, where she says America should return to being a normal country in a normal time. What we ended up getting is, it's true, we cut a few things, but actually the infrastructure of the Cold War persisted.
Yeah, built and it expanded.
Expanded in the 2000s. Yeah. 100%. So like, you look, even like people forget. So like the FBI originally was supposed to basically be like a counterintelligence agency, right? And FBI agents, I think literally couldn't even carry guns around. They went without guns. Maybe they had some if they were arresting people for intelligence, as a part of a counterintelligence operation, but they weren't. And then, the Cold War ends, and all of a sudden, or is ending by the 1980s, and all of a sudden, the FBI finds a new mandate to like track down Italian guys with poker, with poker rackets in New York City. Like, this is mission creep and this is how the capitalist state works. You don't get rid of these things. They persist in like a new and exciting way.
Right. But I was still hopeful that if we could expose the Democrats in their efforts to permanently circumvent the First Amendment, that what we would end up with was a weaker effort, one that would be easier to combat moment by moment than what we were dealing with from 2020 on. And I still believe that could be the case, that it rather than simply expanding, that there's still an opportunity for resistance. I hate to say that kind of word, but resistance and political activism in opposition. It certainly is the case that Trump's efforts to impose an ideological line on society are meeting with more elite resistance and are not being taken up as uniformly. There's not as a consensus around them. The way a consensus emerged practically overnight around 2016 in around the world to combat disinformation. The
Disinformation.
Yeah, right. Well, disinformation is a term of art from the military. It's and so it is to say we need to combat disinformation in society is to militarize society and to declare a permanent state of war in society. and to rob society of its right to make sense of the world for itself. So I am 100% opposed to the idea that the state needs to combat disinformation for the citizens.
So,
that's not their
so
job.
I just want to be clear about a few things. I voted for Trump. I would gladly vote for Trump again. I think Trump winning was good on many levels. It was good for me. Certainly benefited many of my friends. I think it was good for young people who, actually now are the core of Trump's support. If you look at recent polling, I think it was good on many levels.
I wrote in Hillary Clinton. No, I voted for the Libertarian I don't even remember his name now, but I voted for the Libertarian.
Okay.
In the last election.
Because for Trump, man, he was funnier. Yeah.
Well, yeah, but I was facing quite a lot of. I live in Portland. I'm a leftist. We vote by mail. So I was sitting down to vote, and my son was hovering around and saying, no, you cannot do that. No, don't vote for Trump. You're not allowed. And I was all right, fine. So I voted for the Libertarian.
This is why we shouldn't have vote for mail, by the way. I mean, this
yeah.
This is a really bad idea, but yeah.
But I mean, I don't take that act all that seriously. So I mean, if I had thought it was consequential, I would have not allowed.
Right. I mean, you're in Portland, so it doesn't matter.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, I for a long time I used to write in Dr. Philip B. Karp every election for president, which is a made-up candidate. It's a rubber goldfish. So like I don't take that act of voting super seriously.
Very Gen X. Very Gen X.
Yeah. Very anti-politics, right? Yeah.
Which also, by the way, I think that is what's like, and we're talking about culture. The left seems to have wholly retreated. I mean, so I think the future of Gen Z leftism, like, yeah, there's some the Stalinism thing is big, but that kind of reminds me more of like 70s Maoism before the storm of 80s art, like leftist artistic projects. Which I think are going to be the next. I think that's sort of already where we're going.
Yeah, and this is where I want to take Sublation.
Yeah.
So I should be maybe a little wary, but I'm like, oh, as a Gen Xer, my time has come again. I'm going to make Sublation into a kind of countercultural art project as much as it is a leftist rag.
Well, there's a huge market because now the counterculture from the 2000s through not the 2000s, the 2010s through to 2024 when Trump got elected, was a right-wing counterculture. It not even in the sense like, oh, they're not socialists, but in like avowedly right-wing, right?
Mm-hmm.
It was like guys on Twitter with Pepes and they were, getting really into art and thinking, and they were reading a lot and doing a lot. These were not like unsophisticated people, but now they're the mainstream. Like some of those same accounts that were so edgy then are like really boring now. Like they're no longer, they're not on the avant-garde anymore, and I'm not even talking about the people who are like the more mainstream, like we're going to trigger woke people. That was not really, I don't buy that was a real counterculture. I'm talking about like, there was a very specific sort of like the Frogosphere.
Yeah. The 4chan people.
Yeah. And that was more of like the counterculture than anything. But now those, like literally some of the same accounts are like, fucking JD Vance follows them. Like if the vice president follows your account, like you're not the counterculture. I mean, you're many things. And like the stuff they post now is like boring. Like it's like Brooklyn Dad Defiant, but it's Republican.
Yeah,
You know,
Brooklyn Dad Defiant. I see his stuff all the time on Twitter, and I just feel like he's a bot. Like he's like some
yeah.
like Hillary Clinton had a team of her little sycophants.
Well, that's how a lot of them are. The right wing accounts are on Twitter now too. I mean, you look at he recently got doxxed. That guy, Captive Dreamer.
Mm-hmm.
And he was one of the big guys who broke the like Haitian, whether it was real or not, the Haitian dog eating thing that got by Trump. He used to be a lot edgier, and now it's like every other post that he makes is like, thank you, President Trump, for like doing blah blah blah. You're like the best president ever. Like it's like, and it's like, okay, man. I mean, this is the same shit that like Bidenistas posted about like, I mean, it's not, you know, I mean, it's many things. It's not particularly interesting or like avant-garde. And it's because they're the mainstream of the culture though now. I mean, they like, and so the door is wide open if like an interesting left wanted to create some sort of cultural force.
Mm-hmm.
But we're not really seeing that. Instead, it's like, you know, whatever free, like whatever the cause of the week is. But, you know, even that, I barely see it, man. Like, you don't see it anymore. It just doesn't have the kind of cachet it once did. And they're certainly not getting bodies in the streets.
No.
For any of these causes. Like I drove past a protest a couple of days ago, and it was like sad, man. It was like old boomers being like hands off, you know, NATO or whatever. Like, I mean, it's just like
hands off NATO. God.
Yeah, it's like whatever, dude. Like you know, I mean, it's like calm.
It's like it's like mad lib left. You know,
yeah, kind of like I mean, like there's not even the cool, like funny Bob of
insert noun here.
Yeah,
NATO.
Yeah, it's like it's not even like Bob Avakian people or anything like that. It's just like they're all retreated, they're all gone, like they're done. Like,
yeah, well, but it does seem to me to be a danger to fully embrace the cultural turn, because look what happened to, I mean, first of all, of course, with the right, it's never going to actually be able to take up the totality and do critique the way you're suggesting that people do. The right wasn't capable of critique either. It was an avant-garde of complaint. But and that's not even a slam on the right. I mean, their project is to maintain, right?
Yeah,
their project is to maintain what is.
Their project, I mean, this gets into like, you know, it's really funny to me. I mean, like, I meet a ton of right-wing people, and you know, they tend to idealize weird decades to idealize from their own perspective. So like, for instance, the idealization of the 50s from the right is really bizarre, because if you go back and you read like Russell Kirk, The Conservative Mind, like in his intro, his whole intro is like him attacking the 50s as like the triumph of mass democracy and the left. Right. In the 50s, he's saying like the 50s is this, like the 40s and 50s is like the triumph of the left. And like likewise, like you'll meet a lot nowadays too who will idealize like the 90s. The 90s were like, if you go back and read like right-wing people in the 90s, they thought the 90s were like totalitarian dystopia. I mean, you literally had like the ATF like raiding like Ruby Ridge because the guy like allegedly was racist. And
well,
like, his family.
The accusations were a little bit more pointed than that, but yeah.
Yeah, I mean, well, who gives a shit if the guy is like, who cares? Like, I mean, that's not like something the like government should be going around like shooting people's dogs for and their wives and children. Like, it's fucking bizarre.
Yeah,
like,
and I would just point out that the actual left in the 90s, the people I was hanging around with, were very critical of Clinton, were very concerned about the what was really the precursor to the war on terror that was being built up in the 90s, saw, the uh, NAFTA and GATT and the World Trade Organization as the primary enemies, and were not had kind of an ambivalent relationship to like the militia movements. Like they weren't joining them or anything, and they didn't agree with the ideology, but they also saw the state's crackdown on the militias as a danger and
it was
to be
civil liberty,
not to be endorsed.
And that was in many ways like. But I mean, my point is like the right like has like it had no cultural memory of these moments, because like these aren't just like generic Reagan conservatives who are critiquing the 90s or complaining about the 90s, I should say, not critiquing. Complaining about the 90s or complaining about the 50s. These were like real deal right-wing people, and they were saying like these decades suck, man. Like these are the worst decades to live in.
Yeah, so, let's take the 50s for a second longer. Like if you look at the Angry Young Men or the Beats in the 50s, these are cultural critics, of the conformity of the era, and they were embraced later on by the left and maybe even by leftists of the time, and they included people of the left in their ranks. But the difference between the complaints of romantic conservatives and the complaints of leftists were not so clear even then.
Oh, right? No, 100% not. I mean, okay, like look at so like the Beats, like what's his name, Kerouac, was right wing. Kerouac used to like watch the like on TV. He would watch the McCarthy trials, and he was rooting for McCarthy. Like he thought McCarthy was great. He thought McCarthy was like the best,
and yet he hung around with Ginsburg.
And
right.
So and if you look at the 60s, right, it's like a return to like folk music becomes big. It's actually like rock music. Like we have this memory of like rock music in the 60s, but like rock music was sort of destroyed by the 60s. Like rock music used to just be like about like southern like what like kids like having a good time and like rocking out in their cars and like fucking and whatever else. And then like the 60s comes along and it's like folk music about like daisies or whatever. But that's very conservative. Like folk music is very conservative compared to the like rock music that was going on in the 50s and 60s, which was like a rebellion against the sort of Fordist state. As well as sort of a rebellion against, I guess you could call it, this sort of administrative social engineering regime. So right, it's really like our cultural memories are so like weird, and the right's cultural memory is so bizarre. I mean, it is like. They've totally
like the right is following the left
100%
in its understanding of previous eras. Like, if you've seen the movie Pleasantville,
no. Oh wait, is that the one where like
Tobey Maguire?
Yeah, the people are like black and white, and then they get into color. Yeah, right. Yeah, I have seen Pleasantville. Yeah,
right.
Pleasantville's an interesting movie. That's a good point. Yeah.
So Pleasantville depicts the 50s through the lens of 50s television. Like Leave It to Beaver and My Three Sons and Father Knows Best, and
Lucy.
And I Love Lucy, although less so. I Love Lucy is not quite the image of the nuclear family that they want to critique, right? So it's more Leave It to Beaver than anything else. But but the point is that they are taking neoliberal kind of contemporary culture. I think it was like 97 that this movie came out, and opposing it to the stifling conformity of the 50s, which they don't mention was leftist in its character at the
It was
time.
totally leftist in its
Right.
character, yeah.
So yeah, and the return to color is also sort of return to nature, to
Yeah.
spontaneity, to
Yeah.
chaos. So all of these things are ambiguous at best. But also at that time, that in the 90s, there had been a decade or more of activism for gay people. So it was really a reflection on the struggle for gay rights and the necessity to be more tolerant as a nation. So that was there too. But all of this is like always seen through the left, and it's always casting the present back onto the past in ways that don't fully make sense.
Yeah. No, I mean, and this is why, like, my essay is a short intervention. It's not supposed to be, I have in the pipeline, I intend to write something about sort of the growth of the state. I intend to write something attacking a more polemical piece, sort of attacking the people who are attacking Trump as not being actually critical, or being insufficiently critical.
Mm-hmm.
All of that is true. And I want to get to that, but the piece is short and sweet for a reason, and that reason is that I want this piece to sort of set the tone for what we're trying to do at Sublation, which is really to like build a left after the apocalypse, right? So like in many ways, this was the apocalypse for the left, right? So like they're like the sects, the sectarian leftists, all gone. The DSA totally assimilated into basic bitch Democratic Party shit.
Mm-hmm.
And NGO world. So like, I mean, look at like AOC. I mean, it's like she's not even like critical of she's not even complaining about the same things that like leftists were complaining about. It's like just like Kamalaism or something.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, so we have to like build a new left and go positive. And be like, okay, well, there is no left anymore at all to even be dealing with. There's like some people who like claim the mantle of leftism, and they're sort of tilting at windmills. But like for the most part, if you want a left, you're going to have to like basically like do it yourself, build it. And the only way we can build it is if we bring back critique as opposed to complaint. And like we have this opportunity to do so precisely because there are no more leftists who are like interested in just complaining all the time. They're gone.
Yep. Well, I'm glad to have your piece be the first piece in the new Sublation. We've been talking for about 53 minutes, and I figure we can wrap it up here, and then I'll send you another link for the Parrot Room portion. Will you stick around for that?
Yeah, I can stick around. Yeah.
Okay. All right. Well, thanks, Wyatt, and everyone, come join us in the Parrot Room. If you enjoyed this conversation, please do consider supporting us on Patreon. Our patrons help to make sure that Sublation Media can continue to provide interviews, videos, books, and articles that are critical of the left from the left. If you are tired of remaining stuck within bourgeois ideologies and politics, help us sublate them both.